'Tis I. Hey everyone, glad to see you back, glad to see you looking fresh, and Final Fantasy 16 is out, and I cannot wait to play it. Oh my god, this is one of my most anticipated games of the year. I think it's going to be absolutely incredible, one of the best games of the year. I'm so very excited. So, instead of talking about Final Fantasy games, like I'm sure a lot of people are today, why don't we talk about something else, something a little bit more obscure, a little less talked about. Let's talk about the Final Fantasy movies. So, the Final Fantasy movies, there's 3 of them. There's the Spirits Within, and then there's the 2 that are actually based on Final Fantasy games. I saw these in reverse order than how they came out, because of reasons I will explain later. But let's just start, I guess, with Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. The least Final Fantasy of any Final Fantasy product, I would say. You know, this series is no stranger to weird cash grabs and, like, mobile apps that are just money sinks, and there's just a ton of different things that the Final Fantasy franchise does that doesn't really feel, like, very necessary or of very high quality or anything like that. But this movie, from the get-go, it seemed like a great idea. Final Fantasy games have always had amazing cutscenes, and they were always on the cutting edge of technology, and you go back and sure, you can look at some of them and be like, oh, these don't look great now, but you gotta remember when the time they came out, and they were pushing new boundaries, and they were making advancements like no one else had before. Like, Final Fantasy is synonymous with high quality and beautiful art and cutscenes and all this. And so the idea of a Final Fantasy movie, it's like, well, these animations are so good, why don't we just do a full-length story with just those? So it's not a terrible idea, especially in the landscape of trying to figure out what a video game movie is in the early 2000s, especially. Like, there hadn't been really any good ones other than Mortal Kombat, probably, but that being it. So a new idea, a new story being told in the way Final Fantasy games look, it's not a terrible thought. Problem is, the movie itself, while the animation for the time is really good, looking back on it, has aged not very gracefully, but, you know, early 2000s CGI, what can you do? It's not the worst looking movie on that era, for sure. But the story itself, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's so boring, and the characters are nothing, and you watch it, and I felt nothing for anybody, and I barely understood what was going on, and it was such a dragged out, like, mess. Final Fantasy games aren't just cutscenes. Like, there's a whole game that is the meat of it, and then the cutscenes are just kind of the icing on top of the cake, where it's like a nice flourish, and it makes it look pretty, and things people remember, but it's not like the core of what the game is. So when the story of this movie feels like it's supposed to have a game stuck to it to make it make sense, and it doesn't, it makes it very, like, confusing and boring to watch. Now this game, see, there I go. This movie I watched most recently. I watched it last out of these 3. Growing up, I had a friend who loved Final Fantasy, and he loved this movie. He had it, and I remember him telling me to watch it, so I looked it up, and I was like, this movie looks bad. And that was, like, my first impression of what Final Fantasy, like, is this movie. And I was like, is everything like this? Is everything weird sci-fi instead of actual fantasy? Is everything boring? Luckily not. This movie, yeah, I hadn't watched it. I didn't watch it. I didn't want to watch it until recently. I was like, I need to see what this thing. Maybe I'll love it. Maybe I'll be like, hey, you know, for what it is, it's something great. But as a Final Fantasy product, it's bad. It's just overall bad. I don't like it. I don't think it's very good. It has a pretty good voice cast, but other than that, it's nothing special, and it exists as a weird byproduct of a bygone era. And it's the start of the Final Fantasy movie trilogy. Much like the games, the movies have no connective tissue. But, alright, that's enough about that one. Let's jump to what is probably the best one, probably the most well-known, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. They took the criticism of, this movie is about nothing. It's not about a game. It's not about an existing character we care about, so why do we care? And they took that to heart, and they're like, sure, alright, here you go. Here's the most famous Final Fantasy game, filled with the most famous characters. Like, it's set as a sequel to the game. You know, we have Cloud and Sephiroth are in it. Everyone's in it, but those are, of course, who are on the box art behind me, that's who we're going to be seeing in this. And I will say, I have the 4K, which is the Advent Children the Complete, which is longer. It's like an extended cut, and from what I understand, it's better. I've not seen the original cut, but it's pretty good. I think this movie is pretty good. I had a video, which is lost now, unfortunately. The audio and the visuals got all messed up, about video game adaptations into movies, and this is what I talked about, where it's like, this is pretty good. Like, I watched this movie having had only played Final Fantasy VII Remake. I had not played the original game yet, so I was very confused by what was going on. And even still, like, the pieces I could pick up on and the characters that I had met in Final Fantasy VII Remake, they pulled me through. And then I was rewarded with one of the craziest fights I had ever seen. Like, the fight at the end with Sephiroth is so well done. It is insane to see. A lot of people would say, like the first movie, it is confusing and convoluted, and it doesn't make much sense, and you're probably right. And if you don't care about these characters at all, and you just watch this as a movie, it's very weird. It's Final Fantasy VII, it's like, oh, there's 6 other ones? Like, there's one other one. Why is it called this, and you have no idea? Then it's a mess to try to understand. This is by far the best of the 3. It's actually good, I dare say. Now, the voices are a little different than how I knew them in the remake, but I can't really fault it, because this movie came out well before the remake was even announced, so that's not really a fault on the movie itself. But the movie does have Japanese cast and an English cast, which is nice. It also has a weirdly high amount of representation across the board in other franchises. Like in Smash, you can play as Final Fantasy VII Advent Children Cloud. Like, you have that outfit that he has in the movie, and the Omnislash changes to the movie one. And it's weird how much, like, that game, Smash in particular, is like, yeah, Advent Children's a real thing, and we need to remember it. But yeah, if you had to watch one of these, watch Advent Children. If you don't know anything about Final Fantasy VII, good luck going into it, but it's the best one of the 3. However, the most accessible of these 3 probably is the last one we're going to be talking about here, which is Kingsglaive Final Fantasy 15. I watched this one first because Final Fantasy 15 was my very first full-on Final Fantasy game. I had delved and I knew about other characters and stories. I had played a little bit of 10, but 15 was the first one I sat down and played the whole way through, and I loved it. I know a lot of people have faults with it, and I understand those faults for sure, but I love playing Final Fantasy 15. To this day, I have very fond memories of it. The movie, on the other hand, took what made the game so great, and that's our main cast of boys on this road trip. That's the core of what I love about that game. Those 4 characters are amazing. I love them all. The movie's like, what if we just do a prequel about the king, Noctis' dad, and include his bride-to-be, Lady Lunafreya, and we just said it before the game, and that's an idea, I guess. Like, if you want to expand the universe a little, but like, why? Why? I have a lot of questions as to like the thought process of that. Like, yeah, we don't want to mess with the story or what the characters were doing during the story, but like, if you want to do a prequel, just, you could have them be kids. Like, all these guys have a backstory. Gladio has like a pretty good story. Ignis and Prompto, like, all of them, they have stories to tell, and like how they all kind of met and how they became friends and stuff like that. You could do easy an hour and a half on that, I'm sure. And there's even like an anime web series about like side stories from them, which is way better than this movie is. This movie like looks amazing. Like, out of the 3, like, visually, it's incredible. Like, wow, the animation's so great, but the story, I don't get. Plus, like, the voices, my problem with the voices in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children are vastly amplified here, because the voices in the game and the movie should be the same. I'm sure the reason isn't that they just couldn't get him back, because they swapped him out with, like, say, the king. They swapped him out with Sean Bean. Lady Lunafreya, they swapped her out with Lena Headey. Like, you cannot tell me that Sean Bean and Lena Headey, 2 Game of Thrones alum, are less busy than the voice actors from Final Fantasy 15. You cannot tell me that. I'm sure they're much more expensive. I'm sure there's a lot more work involved getting them, all of this. And for what? Like, it's not like they're so much better. Like, Lady Lunafreya, while being a tough name to say, has fans. Like, she's a character with voice lines in that game, and her story concludes very well. Like, the king is a lot less of a character, but he's still a character, and they both talk in the game. I don't understand why they just changed the voice for seemingly no reason. It does also have a 4K. I don't know if Spirits Within have a 4K, but this movie has a 4K. When I got announced, I was like, Part of me wanted to buy it just as a weird novelty of, like, an era and a game that I love, like a movie I don't. And maybe if it's, like, super cheap, if I find the 4K for, like, less than $10, maybe I'll get it one day, and maybe I'll give it another chance, and maybe I'll really like it, because I can, like, take a step back from my love from the game, because it have been a few years, so I watched it, like, pretty close after I finished the game. So I've been told, if you have to watch one, stay away from Spirits Within. If you're gonna watch 2 of them, if you watch all 3, yes, go ahead. Maybe we'll get a 16 movie. It's been enough time. They seem to do it on the ones that are super duper popular. 10 will probably be the next most popular, but if 16 is as good as it looks, we might get one. But the story seems pretty huge and big, like large in scope. So they would have to do something, I'm sure, with a prequel or sequel or something. So those are the Final Fantasy movies. Have you seen them? Are you just learning about them today? Like I said, go check them out if you want, but don't expect anything incredible from any of them, really. They're nice little novelties, but I doubt they're anyone's favorite movie. But that'll about do it for me. Thank you so very much for watching, and as always, like this if you like this, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you at some point.